Okay, I think we're ready. So Q&A. Really great presentations, and I'm sure all of you have a lot of questions for this very, very diverse panel of experts. But I wanted to just kick it off, just following, Steve, your last safety presentation. I'm very interested, Tim, and then Juliet, I have a follow-up question for you on safety. But Tim, as you're constantly trying to bring guests closer to animals, especially in animal encounters. Obviously, safety is a bit of a different protocol and different types of precautions that you have to take. Can you elaborate a little bit on the protocols you would take to bring a guest closer in an animal interaction?
Sure. I'm on. I have one. So one of the things we'd say every day is animals in and people out of the exhibit. So when you're designing exhibits, you also have to take into account the factor of what someone might do. So you're building to those standards of fence heights and fence openings and things like that. But with our interaction programs, we're very hands-on with and very in a controlled environment with staff at the location. So we take advantage of that time not only to monitor the behavior of the guest and make sure they don't do, like our giraffes, you don't pet our giraffes, you just feed the giraffes. But we take advantage of that time when they're sitting with the animal and doing the interaction to really use it as an educational opportunity at the same time. So they're being educated and they think that the person there is really being an educator, but they're also kind of monitoring the behavior in the situation. So we're very, not controlling, but we have somebody on the scene all the time when somebody's doing an interaction.
I can imagine you have to be very controlling in that aspect. And Juliet, why don't you talk a little bit about safety when you're, especially with Monster Jam, you're putting people into these massive vehicles, putting them up on two wheels, jumping over cars in front of tens of thousands of people in a live audience. Obviously, that's a bit unique from a safety standpoint as well.
Safety is obviously very important to us at Fell Entertainment. We have a great safety team that has many years of experience, and we are constantly evaluating what we do. For Monster Jam in particular, we have a protocol where we always have a person, whether it's at an event or if we're doing a ride truck experience, whose sole job it is to watch the truck and watch the track, and they have a remote where they're able to turn off the ignition to the engine and cut the power to that truck at any time. And so if we feel that the truck has gone out of control, or there's a mechanical issue or something else going on, it's that person's job to always be watching the truck, observing it. They're educated on what to look for and to cut the power to that engine as needed. And then we have a number of other safety protocols that go into place. But what's important about Monster Jam also is that the real safety comes in the driver training and in the training of the crew and in those folks using their best judgment and making sure that they make the decisions and they're empowered to make the decisions that are right for safety versus ever wondering if we at higher levels of management would want them to perform under circumstances that they don't think are safe.
I guess this is for Juliet and Tim. Have we seen the end of or are we witnessing the end of the performing mammal? And is it any different in the States or around the world?
I think maybe the word performing is what's changing, and we talk about it all the time at the zoo, words matter. We have, so we'll do presentations where we show our foot care on elephants, or we'll show things like that to the public. And literally when I got to the zoo, there was a bench that said elephant show on the bench that the person would stand on. I'm like, it's not a show, it's a presentation. So it's really showing natural behaviors with the animals, and you're seeing that kind of with SeaWorld now. They've gone to the more the shows showing natural animal behaviors and more education about the animals. And the same thing I think at zoos, and the way you're presenting it has become very important. We're not doing a show, we're doing a presentation of how we care for the elephants, or we're going to do a presentation on the strength of this lion and why they like to do those sort of things. So I think it's just changing in that manner, I think.
Should we open it up to the house? Does anybody have any questions for the panel? I think there's someone in the back there.
Yeah, it's the troublemaker in the green dress again. Sorry about that. These questions, comments are for Tim. First of all, Tim, I am from Cincinnati. So I would like to know what Timothy's intentions are for Fiona.
Oh, people ask that.
And what his job prospects and financial prospects are. Determine whether he's good enough for her.
He's got a, you have to be careful because Cincinnati's been a little nervous about Timothy, but there's another hippo in Memphis that's interested in Timothy as well. So
I'm sure Fiona will be fine.
he is pure of heart. He's a very sweet hippo. He lives with his grandmother. So in the video you saw him with another hippo, that's his grandmother. He thinks he's a dolphin, as you saw in the video. He literally runs around and then dives through the pool all day long. So he's a very sweet hippo. We had a pair of hippos at our zoo for 40 years that had 8 babies in the AZA, and at some point the AZA said no more from those. And so Timothy is the last grandson of that pair, and he moved back in with grandma. So it's a great story, and we're really having a fun time with Fiona and all the people from Cincinnati. He posts every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central, and people follow it like a TV show. And if
I know. I'm one of those.
If the post is late, it just went out a little while ago because he's talking about his birthday, but if the post is late, people start messaging us like, what's wrong with Timothy? So we do it a little different. So our zoo, Timothy talks in first person. Cincinnati's Fiona does not talk in first person. The zoo will talk for her.
No, she has people.
Yeah, she has people. And that's been a real change for telling stories in the zoo too. But in the past, the zoos didn't want to give animals names or personalities, and they have names and personalities, and the keepers do love them. So we talk about the word love all the time, and that's why that's the first word in our mission. So the times have changed where now zoos they're not afraid to let people know these are the animals' names. We love these animals. We care for these animals. And with what I went through at Blackfish and SeaWorld, we were attacked at an emotional level. We answered at a scientific level. So Timothy's a good example of giving a personality to the zoo and to Timothy at the same time. People see us as humans that really love the animals, taking care of the animals. So he's a good example of how we're using this experience to really show people how we love our animals.
On a more serious note, thank you. How can zoos and aquariums are an area that TEA has not really explored very much. So how can we as an association help you moving forward?
Well, I think zoos are going through a very fast revolution right now. They're very much changing into more experience space. We were talking earlier today, when I got to our zoo, every single building was brown. They all matched, and I asked them why everything was brown. They said, well, we had a color committee, and they picked brown for everything. I don't know why they had a committee. So now we're adding theming and music and intersections and bright colors and making it fun, and you're seeing realms now in zoos with theming. And so they're just, I feel, getting there kind of behind the theme parks where they've been for the last 50 years. So I think you'll probably start seeing more of that. And you're also seeing a lot of people from the SeaWorlds and the theme parks moving into the zoo industry as leaders. So I think it's going to start integrating more. And zoos are not just a place where you come and look at animals. People can do that on TV or the internet. They want an experience. So we're working really hard to provide experiences with them through our storytelling and our theming and things like that. So I think it's going to come together.
Yes.
Hi, this question's also for Tim. I'm Marissa Blake. I'm an exhibit designer at the Shed Aquarium. So I'm also, when I started, I had no idea how much conservation the Shed does. I'll never forget, there was someone who came up to me one of my first days and budges me and says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Dolphin, that I paid to come see you." And I was like, we do conservation. So the question is, how is your team working to tell the conservation story in the physical environment so that if a guest comes through and they don't have the opportunity to engage with a staff member, that they know the conservation story?
Yeah, that's a lot of it's done. We have 600 volunteers. We have a docent program that's 50 years old this year. They're the most important part of the zoo experience because they're having the conversations with people one-on-one, so that's where they can really tell those stories of the conservation work we do. Or at our giraffe feed, we can tell the story that there's less than 4,000 of this species left in the wild, and people are just shocked. And so we tell them those kind of at our touch points. And even in our theming now, we just themed an Amazonian intersection. And that Project Selva that we do in the Amazon, we're putting a big billboard. It'll look like a billboard like you would see in Amazon called Project Selva. And it has our logo, Project Selva. And then it'll have the website to our conservation. So we're trying to weave it into our theming and into our storytelling on the signs and through our employees. And we just created, actually this week, our Center for Conservation Research Facebook page because Dante has the most incredible photos and the most incredible content. So we're really trying to get him out there. Our biggest challenge for telling our story is we have so many stories to tell, which is a good problem. But with our education and conservation work, and then things that are happening at the zoo and everything else, it's hard to tell the message, all the messaging. So that's one of our biggest challenges, is the amount of messaging we have.
More questions? Yes.
Hello, this question's for Juliet. I have come from live show background, and I know over the years live shows have somewhat decreased in theme park environments over the years in some places. You have all live shows, and I would think they would take a large capacity to hire dancers, performers, your expertise in performing that you have. Have you had a hard time filling those roles over the last several years?
Great question. So we do have about 25 tours, and we are constantly casting for those tours. We happen to be the largest employer of professional ice skaters, among other things you could say about us. And in certain cases, we have, been challenged in finding performers. And I think in particular, one of the challenges that we've had that is unique to our business as a touring entity is compliance with immigration, as that has really changed the landscape there in terms of either bringing performers into the United States or touring our performers in and out of, whether it's Europe or China or other parts of the world, is a continued area of focus for us. And so in particular, that's a place where we're focused in terms of making sure that we're maintaining the high standards of performance and also complying with all the regulation.
We have time for another question.
Hi, this question's for Juliet as well. I also come from a live concert background, and I think one thing we've been experimenting with in at least the symphony orchestra world where I'm from is engaging in interactive formats. And I feel like from what you're discussing, and particularly maybe given your company's background with the circus and things, you may have been tinkering, and maybe this new project with Monster Jam at Cedar Fair this summer might involve more interaction from guests and more sort of flexible formats. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you may or may not be creating shows that are more responsive to input from your audiences.
Great question. So throughout all of our events, we really have a range of spectrum of engagement and interaction. So one of the examples I mentioned was our fan voting in Monster Jam. So that brings our Monster Jam fans right into the action. It also puts them on their phone, which for us as a company was something that we debated internally. How much we see fans, as all of us do, watching our shows through the lens of their phone or their camera, and how much do we want to ask them to be on it, to interact. In that circumstance, because it's a sporting event, we thought that it was appropriate, and it really has drawn them in and engaged them in the experience. In other more narrative examples, in Marvel Universe Live, we have an element of the show that we created that is it's called Electrolink, and it's a component of Tony Stark of Iron Man, and it is an item that we sell, looks similar to a wristwatch, that is activated at different parts of the show. So we're bringing audience members in, they feel like they're part of creating the action, and it ties into the narrative. Some other things that we do that have been really successful involve bringing audiences in earlier into the experience. And so before all of our Monster Jam and Supercross events, we have these fan festivals where the fans get a chance to meet the athletes and the drivers before the show. They get a chance to see these trucks, the bikes, how they're getting prepared and ready for the race or for the Monster Jam competition. And that really helps educate them and excite them for what they're about to see. And it deepens their connection, their affinity, by getting to know the athletes before they're actually seeing them compete. And so that's been really successful, really fun for us. And then we've actually introduced, just within recent time, we've introduced some VIP experiences at Disney on Ice as well, as another way to give fans something that they've really been asking for at our Disney on Ice tours. And so we do a lot before the show, and then we still look for different ways throughout the show. And actually, I should say one other example that's been super successful for us is just this past year, or I guess maybe in the past 2 years, on some of our Disney on Ice tours, we've introduced live hosts. So previously, everyone that we had at Disney on Ice was on track. And so now we actually have live hosts who are their own characters. They're in the audience, they're scripted, but they're engaging with audience members. So they're asking kids questions about the show, trivia questions. You know, the kids, or families in the audience get a chance to touch and feel different props, see, different characters come up behind them, and there's that element of surprise, of spontaneity that we've put into an experience that's otherwise really heavily choreographed and scripted. And it's that unexpected element of it, and that it really can be any audience member that creates a relatability and a connection that even if it isn't your seat, it could be. And that possibility is something that I think keeps audiences engaged and excited, and also gives you a real reason to come back.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. There's somebody in the back.
Hi, I thought everything you said was really interesting. I was raised in the 80s, and so the slide you had that basically said we weren't raised to know how to stay alive almost was really interesting to me. I'm a lighting designer, and we're starting to see some of that trickle into the industry, like light levels on stairs in Florida need 10-foot candles, which is 10 times the amount of light you need on pathways and everything else. So how do we balance some of those possibly misplaced efforts to develop safety that affect how we're able to kind of craft these more naturalistic environments that we shoot for?
So that's a good question, and one of the big challenges for the industry. What we see in a lot of cases where something occurs and there's then a bit of public outcry is an overreaction. I think the example that I used with the playgrounds, there was a significant overreaction, and in fact in recent years with a kind of a re-understanding that risk is part of the development process for anybody who's growing up, you see junkyard playgrounds now showing up on the landscape that are specifically designed to be a little bit more like the kids roaming out in the woods, and maybe something that's similar to what you showed in your environment, where there's a little bit more natural exposure. And I could see that there were some safety precautions made, but at the same time, you've moved a little bit in the other direction, because that's what the audience wants and it's what they need, and the risks are not really that egregious. So I think in all cases, the whole concept behind this safety evaluation is to really look at it and decide what is in fact necessary. The thing about safety is it's kind of like a hot potato. When people talk about it, they don't ever want to say that they don't want to be safe. And so there's this tendency to just push it and push it and push it to the point where it becomes unreasonable, and it doesn't really help the business that much, and it isn't really necessary. And the pullback is to try and use more logical thought to determine, where is that goal line really? What does it really need to achieve? And for example, taking advantage of the fact that there were 500 years of experience with hot drinks before we overreacted and decided we needed to put warning labels on everything probably would have been a more sane result. And maybe that's something that could be applied in every arena, if that makes sense.
Are talking about the playgrounds. He's talking about they literally are giving kids saws and and hammers and nails and letting them just build things. And we have an area of that at our zoo school. We call it the anarchy zone, where we just put 2x4s and pipes and cardboard boxes, and they just build things out there. And when I got to the zoo, I came from the theme park world, which is hyper risk adverse. And my first few days at this school, they were on the campus at that time of the zoo. Their kids were in the trees, and I'm like, get down from the trees. And they're like, no, we told them to climb the trees. And they're outside, it's raining, they're outside learning how the rain is coming down off the trees and off the roofs, and they're in the water. And we say there's no bad weather, just bad weather clothing choices. So the kids are outside 70% of the day, but we teach them how to assess their own safety. So we ask them before they do something, how will you keep yourself safe when you do this? So we're teaching them how to learn. And they're 3, 4, and 5-year-olds at our school, so they're at the age where they're soaking up everything, and they do the most learning in their whole life during this time. So at that age, we're teaching, they're self-assessing how they're gonna keep themselves safe, and they don't get hurt. I mean, it took me a long time to adjust to that, and then even the campus is just chaos everywhere with just stuff and boxes and boards everywhere, and I'm used to neat, clean, and orderly. So, but teaching them at that young age, I think, is important, and the fact that we all survived this long is a true miracle. Apparently.
Yeah, what you find is that if you don't provide that level of risk, they'll discover ways to create it for themselves, like climbing on the outside of all that play equipment.
Yeah,
that was because that's what they determined was fun and had the appropriate risk level, which is actually something they're seeking, not consciously, but they're seeking to kind of measure what they can get away with doing and what their skill set accomplishes. So you have to answer that mail, or it will be answered for you.
I think that's our time, regretfully. Steve Blum, Juliet Feld-Grossman, Tim Morrow.
Thank you all.